The Chamber PAC is proud to support candidates of both parties who support the Chamber's public policy goals, and tonight we're bringing the political conversation to the Mackinac Policy Conference's center stage. This is a critical time for the City of Detroit and its continued rebirth. And the Chamber PAC is pleased to be engaging a number of the Detroit mayoral candidates in tonight's discussion. So now, please join me in welcoming our moderators for this forum, the editorial page editor for the Detroit News, Nolan Finley, and the editorial page editor for the Detroit Free Press, Stephen Henderson. Thank you.
Who's here?
You're there. All right, so let's bring out our candidates. First, we have former CEO of the Detroit Medical Center, Mike Duggan. Next, we have State Representative Fred Durhal, Jr. We have former State Representative Lisa Howze.
Good luck, Lisa.
And finally, Wayne County Sheriff Benny Napoleon.
Take a seat.
Yep.
Let's get this thing underway. Thank you all for coming. This is not a traditional debate by any means. There's not question, rebuttal, rebuttal. What we want here is to have a conversation with these candidates so we can get a feel for their views on as many issues as we can get through tonight. We'll throw out, the format will be, we'll throw out a question to a candidate and encourage the other candidates to engage in the question, to challenge each other, call each other out when you feel it's appropriate, jump in there. Nobody's timing these responses, but if you have something to say it. These folks paid to see a good scrap, so let's try to get no rules tonight. The only rules the Chamber asked us to abide by is no bourbon for Steve and I until after the event when we all head down to the Tea Garden for our party. So
that's right. We'll have plenty.
Steve?
All right. First question goes to Mr. Duggan. I want to take us to mid-2014, maybe late 2014. The emergency manager decides the financial emergency is over, and he's gone. But of course, Detroit is still left with a pile of problems: declining population, eroded tax base, crime probably will still be a major issue. I want to talk about the difference between your history is mostly as a turnaround guy. Your record is a lot about being a turnaround guy, financial turnaround guy. Talk, though, about how you rebuild a city like Detroit. What would be your approach to increasing the population, rebuilding the tax base, and getting things like crime under control?
Well, yeah, the idea that the emergency manager is going to come in and wave a wand and Detroit's financial problems are going to go away has not been the history in this state. We just see Hamtramck about to go through it for a second time.
Sure.
We've seen E-Course multiple times. But I think it's exactly the right question. And we start with the neighborhoods. And abandoned houses have been choking the life out of our community for 40 years. And we've tried to demolish our way out of it. And certainly a huge priority will be to go back to what I was doing when I was in the prosecutor's office, when we were suing the owners of abandoned houses and giving them the opportunity either to fix it up themselves or deed it to us and we'd sell it to families who moved in. And we got more than 500 abandoned houses that we got occupied and fixed up. And we went through neighborhoods where they had 1 or 2 or 3 abandoned houses on a block, took an entire block, moved families in, and we did that. The rest of the block started to plant flowers and paint gutters because just like blight spreads, hope spreads. I think we go after the abandoned houses, we get the street lights on with better accountability on the repair, and then we do some things to get the police response time down. And if we are living in a city by the end of 2014 where the abandoned buildings are starting to go away, the police are showing up and the street lights are on, I do think you'll see a reversal in the population loss.
I think the real issue is one of, when it talks to repopulating, I think you have to figure out why people left in the first place. If, in fact, we were running a business and we were losing customers, and to the tune of almost 1 million. Detroit once had 1.7 million people. Now you have about 700,000. If, in fact, you ask people who have left the city of Detroit why they have left, I think overwhelmingly they will tell you, unless they were relocated for employment purposes, they would tell you they've left for one of 3 reasons. A, crime. B, the school system. And C, they're going to talk about insurance and high taxes. We have to fix the things first that people are most concerned about. Until such time as we affirm Detroit as a safe city, then you won't be able to repopulate this city. You won't have people willing to come back in, young families with children. We have to get the education system straight, and we have to create an environment where there's a climate of compliance, where people believe that they can plant flowers in their front yard, they can walk their dogs up and down the street, and that they can go to and from the corner store. It's really an issue of safety and education if you're going to repopulate the
Well,
city.
what it sounds like to me is Sheriff Napoleon should stay in law enforcement. I mean,
The difference
public safety is key. And when you listen to when I hear the testimonies that I hear in the city of Detroit, you have a single mother who has 4 children who simply wants to go to the Dollar General that's in her neighborhood. It's walking distance away. However, she will pack up her 4 kids into her car and drive to the suburbs to buy that broom or cleaning supplies. You have a father who moved out of the city of Detroit with his family. Why? Because someone attempted to break in at his daughter's bedroom window. These are the things that are driving people out of the city of Detroit. How do we go about addressing it? Well, we have to use both collaboration and coordination. Collaboration from the standpoint of working with multiple levels of law enforcement, whether it be local, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, and coordinating new technology to take our crime fighting skills to the 21st century level. What I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is something that's being used in the city of Baltimore. They have a high crime rate. It's CSC, crime surveillance cameras. People will not commit crimes. People will not break in, burglarize your homes if they know that they're being watched. And this has driven down crime in that area by 25%.
But you've got to do more than that. What is wrong in the city of Detroit, first of all, is the budget. You can't hire a cop if you don't have a way to pay him. You certainly are not going to be able to provide the wealth of city services that a city needs to be able to provide, DPW, fire, EMS, all of that, if you can't balance a budget. The problem in Detroit is that budgets have been rolled over back and forth for the last 40 years. And because of that, we have a situation now where the city of Detroit is pushed into a corner and it cannot afford to borrow money. It cannot afford to pay debt that it already has. First order of business is to get control of the finances, and then we can start looking at doing some of the things we need to do to shore up the communities and make sure that city services are there for the citizens who deserve to have them.
And I think that gets us into our next question, and it's to you, Benny, and I know you were about to jump in there.
And you cut me off.
I did.
It's going to happen.
But continuing on the same theme, City of Detroit needs good fiscal manager come in after the emergency manager is gone. As the senator said, some of the representatives said.
I'll take the promotion.
Yeah, go ahead. Somebody to come in and keep us on a fiscal track. Bob Ficano accuses you of mismanaging your budget, overspending the budget he gives you. Given that record, how can you make a claim to being a strong fiscal manager?
Well, first and foremost, I managed my $400 million budget in the Detroit Police Department for several years, and I did it within budget. When you give someone a built-in deficit, you can't manage. I've got 1,000 people over the number of people that they budgeted me for, 1,800 as opposed to 2,800. If Bob Ficano wants to let 1,000 people out of my jail and he wants to take responsibility for it to get me in budget, he's welcome to do that. But Benny Napoleon is, when we're talking about how crime is here, Benny Napoleon's not going to put 1,000 dangerous people on the street. Murderers, rapists, robbers, child molesters, domestic violence folks. I'm going to do it.
How about this then? We don't want to threaten the citizens of the city of Detroit with letting loose criminals. How about letting loose some of your appointees?
Oh, well, that's
Got
fine,
41?
I don't have 41 appointees. If in fact you said you're an accountant, if you could count. I don't have 41 appointees. I actually, the difference between my agency and others is that we have people who are in what are determined appointed positions that in other agencies are civil service. So they have to be there. They're under a court order. I couldn't get rid of them if I wanted to.
Mike, you just going to sit there and watch them fight?
You know, my interest is not the sheriff's budget, but the city's budget.
Thank you.
And it looks hopeless, right? We got these huge deficits and the like. I got to tell you, you know, when you hear, and Lisa Howze has pointed this out, when they say you got a $15 billion debt, when you break it down, it isn't nearly as horrible as it sounds. I'm not saying we don't have serious problems, we do, but $6 billion of that is on the water department. When you look at what's left, it's $9 billion. Of the remaining $9 billion is $1 billion in bonds, $2 billion in retirement, and $6 billion in retiree health. We've got a huge retiree health issue, which is the way we ought to be talking about this. And we could not possibly be running our retiree health care more inefficiently than we are. We have several experts in this audience from different hospital systems that could show you today how to take the chronic illnesses of people with diabetes and heart disease, and instead of running them through hospitals over and over, what we can do to keep them well and drive those costs down. We have the Affordable Care Act coming in January that's going to offer lower cost exchange options. I think we can sit down with the employees and make a significant impact on this by working on this constructively. But I can tell you, the finances of Detroit today aren't nearly as dreary as what I walked into in DMC in 2004, and we sat down together, workers and management together, and worked it out.
Well, let me tell you, they're much worse
Frank,
than
go
that. I sit on the Appropriations Committee of the House of Representatives, and that is the Budget Committee. I deal with a $56 billion budget. And when you have $380 million projected budget for next month, that is horrible. And then when you juxtapose that next to it with a $16 billion deficit, and people want to quibble about the money, if you don't have $16 billion to pay the bill, you're still in debt. And that's the bottom line in Detroit.
You're wrong, Fred.
We have to be able to do two things. You're running two budgets here. You have an operations budget, and you also have the structural budget. And because I know how to budget, I can tell you, in order for us to get to a point where we can balance both of these budgets out, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take some hard choices that the city of Detroit has not been used to. But because I believe in our citizens, and I believe that we want to get it right, that we will do what we have to do in order to get it.
As the only
Because if you don't do that, you don't
sitting on
have
this
fire
stage,
and police.
a certified public accountant.
Doesn't make you an
I'm
expert.
glad that.
It makes you an
trust me.
accountant.
No.
Doesn't
Any-
make you an
any
expert.
All right,
CPAs in
Fred.
the audience,
Let her talk.
trust me, we had to go through some tough rigor. It was much even harder than passing the bar exam. But let me just be clear on something, people. Ask anyone who's studying for it right now. They'll tell you that.
I wouldn't know. I never took the
No
bar exam.
disparaging remarks
like
toward those
I'm like Shakespeare.
barristers in the audience.
First
I
we
love
get rid
you
of the
just the
lawyers.
same. Because the truth of the matter is, your CPA is the quarterback of your team. They will bring in legal. They will bring in the bankers. They'll bring in the underwriters to get the deal done. I know that. I am a trained, disciplined
One
business
more
professional.
But they've had 40 years to do it, and they haven't
All right.
done it.
And you're making my
Here's-
point.
Here's another way to redirect that question.
All right.
We saw a big flap last week about the possibility of assets from the DIA
Yes.
being, on the table for Detroit's restructuring. When you borrow 33 times what the city's net assets are,
Yes.
should those assets be at stake when you try to?
Let's just be
restructure?
clear. No, let's address this. First of all, you have to manage your debt. Debt is not something that you fear, it's something that you manage. The past 40 years, in terms of those who have been in charge, those who have been a part of administrations who have helped to get us in this financial position that we're in today, are responsible for that. But how do you proceed responsibly in addressing the issue? Number one, before you go selling off assets, assets are something that puts money into your pocket. But you have to deal with the deficit that's running in the general fund. You do that by allocating costs over to the program funds, pulling down federal dollars. So the less money I have running through my general fund, the less of a deficit I
That's
have.
what
But
we've
there's
done
an
for a long
assumption.
time
Your
in this
assumption is that you're going to get the federal dollars. The problem
You
is the
can't
federal
proceed-
government is in just as much
You
trouble
cannot proceed
with
as
a
if
trillion
something's not
dollar
going
debt.
to happen. I'm proceeding as if it is so.
When you pull
And
up
I
in
can back it
Washington,
up.
D.C. and try to come back with a bag of money, it's
Our
not
problem
going to happen.
is we
All right,
have
all right,
not
Benny.
demonstrated the ability to manage. Therefore, no one will entrust you to give you more money to mismanage.
Well-
With Lisa Howze in the office as mayor, it will be a new day.
Okay.
It will be new direction in the
All
city of
right,
Detroit.
Benny, you said yes, they should be on the table.
Well, I mean, if in fact we're looking at Belle Isle and the water department, why would we leave the DIA out?
Fair enough. Mike?
And I don't believe, and I have not seen anything to make me to believe that should be talking about selling Belle Isle, the water department, or the art.
Right.
And let me come back to Fred's point because it was not correct. When he said if you don't have $15 billion, you're out of luck. That's not true.
That's not what I said.
That's like saying you have to pay your mortgage tomorrow. If you go through Kevin Orr's report and all the finances, our situation is basically this. We're taking in $1.1 billion a year in revenue, and we're spending $1.3 billion. That's a problem, and it's gotten us here. But it's not an unsolvable problem. You should have tried walking into DMC in January of 2004 when they said to me in 4 months we're going to be out of cash and all the hospitals are going to be closed. What we have to do is manage that $200 million issue. We can take a chunk by negotiating retiree health. We're missing all kinds of income tax collections from people who live in the city and work at jobs in the suburbs. And we're managing things just senselessly. The fire department's spending more than $200 million a year, and the firefighters tell me 70% of the runs they make are to fires in vacant buildings. We won't deal with the vacant building issue, but we'll spend better than $200 million a year running firefighters out to put out the fires, not to mention the lives we're risking in doing this. But this is something that I've been through before. You don't start panicking with the assets. You say, how do we close the $200 million run rate in partnership with our bondholders, our unions, and all other costs?
Well, Mike, let me dovetail what you're saying, because part of what you're saying is absolutely correct. But there is no denial that if you don't have $16 billion and you've got to pay out that, no matter whether you owe it 30 years from now or 30 minutes from now, you don't have the money, you can't afford to pay it. Ask people who've lost their homes because of foreclosure, they had the same kind of issues. They're upside down. The city of Detroit is upside down financially. In order for us to be able to get to the bond market and get favorable looks, we're going to have to change the tactics in the administration.
Well, we have
had
to.
no administration downtown
The bottom line
in the
is this,
last 4
folks.
years, and that's why we have attacked the problem.
We have to take a strategic review of city service, those that are essential. We are not going to be able to do the same things that we have done over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. We're going to have to look at the budget and say there are things that we're absolutely going to have to do. Police, fire, EMS, garbage collection, essential service, public health, safety, and welfare. We have to do those things. Then there are things that we're going to have to look at and say, maybe we want to do them, we're going to partner with somebody to help us do them. And then there's some other things, quite frankly, we're going to have to look at the citizens of Detroit in the eye and say to them, we can no longer do this. We can't afford to do it, and that's how you scrub that 200.
Lisa, last word before we move on quickly.
On this particular topic, what we have done historically is we have used a cost-based budgeting model, which basically says you take last year's budget, figure out what you're going to cut to try to come in with where you expect your revenues to be. We can no longer do that. We have to have a budget for outcomes, meaning that the things that the citizens of this city value, like public safety, like public works, like their recreational centers for their children, those are the things that we want to provide. If the citizens say they're willing to pay for it, we're going to set the priorities to be able to deliver those services in a timely, effective, and efficient manner.
Okay,
I think that's what I just said, isn't it?
That's sort of.
They believe me, though.
It sounded better coming from her.
Mike joins the chorus now. All right, Mike.
Steve, you keep an arm on him, I'll keep an arm.
Yeah, that's right. Don't get out of that
Are
chair.
you packing Benny up here?
Always. It's like the American Express card. I
Let
don't
them
leave
both
home
battle,
without it.
man. I'm loving this. This is great.
Representative Durhal,
Yes.
everybody's excited about what's going on downtown and the revival and young people moving in, buildings being reopened. But you get out in the neighborhoods, and there's no Dan Gilbert in the neighborhoods.
Yes.
People fleeing still, conditions terrible. That's a different story. And how do you reverse what's going on in the neighborhoods to bring more closely in line with what's going on downtown?
Well, obviously, I'm the representative who has one of the poorest districts in the state of Michigan, right in the middle of the city of Detroit, and goes down to southwest Detroit. And there's a lot of abandonment and the situation you've already explained. The way that we have to try to deal with that, first of all, is to arrest all of the blighting influences that take place in a neighborhood. We, in some cases, are going to have to teach people who live in the community how to be communal, how to live in a community without tearing it to pieces. Then we've got to move, and I have been supportive of some legislative efforts that are designed to stop the illegal stripping of houses that has taken place in the city of Detroit, that we believe is a black market and a conspiracy, where people have joined forces to tear a neighborhood apart by stripping everything out of an abandoned house that you can see. 48 hours is the normal time that it takes in Detroit for a house to become abandoned and then stripped to the core, where you can't do anything but demolish it. We've got to be able to grab hold of that. And to that end, what I've done is done two things. One, I'm talking to people at Habitat for Humanity to come in and take in selective neighborhoods that we can look at, a way to rebuild those neighborhoods by getting rid of all of those abandoned properties and replacing them with new housing. Now, you're not going to be able to do that all over the place, but absolutely we can start the process by taking some neighborhoods and targeting them for this new redevelopment. Plus, I also talked to, let me finish, and I also had a conversation with Quicken Loans. These guys do the mortgages for these houses. And I've said to them that I think it's imperative that they create a new mortgage product. And that is a product that's based on a person's ability to pay and not on some number grabbed out of their actuarial files. To take a house, which is a 30-year fixed, and make it a 40-year fixed, so that people are able to pay the note, which would cut their monthly payment in half from $500, for example, to $250. That person is more likely to stay in that house if they can afford to do it. And I think that's something that we have got to look at.
Go ahead,
it's
Lisa.
thinking outside the box.
Let's think outside the box this way. The way you transform a neighborhood is by first transforming the lives of the people who live in that neighborhood. The individual should not become a product of their environment. They have an opportunity to change their environment. And how do you do that? Through entrepreneurship. When I look outside of my living room window, I see about 10 to 15 young men and young women who are hanging out on the porch or playing basketball in the streets. It's about giving these young people an opportunity to be engaged in the community, and not only that, to see their way to help to build the community through entrepreneurship. That is the first job that one can have. I had one when I was 10 years old and started my own lemonade stand. Took that to high school, was able to save $4,000 to fund my first semester at the University of Michigan. And I came back to the neighborhood. Why? Because I want to give back. That's how you transform what our communities look like.
You know, Nolan, I have what I call my Square Mile Initiative. It will focus on not this great big thing that we call the city of Detroit that looks so intimidating to most. It's going to focus on one little square mile. We're going to assign a police officer every square mile of the city of Detroit. And that person will be assigned to handle all of the problems, abandoned cars, abandoned homes, deal with the school issues, business issues, work with the clergy people, organize the community together. We're going to take this city square mile by square mile and clean it up. And that's really, you have to get the responsibility down to the lowest level to get people to take ownership of their community. Don't ask them to worry about this whole great big city of Detroit. We're going to do it square mile by square mile.
Is that the same as your every neighborhood has a future, Mike?
You know, it is, it's a version of it, but here's the thing. I think you always start when you say what you're going to do, talk about what you did do. And it seemed like the abandoned property problem was hopeless in this community when I was a prosecutor, and you watched it over and over. A house would go vacant, everybody's property values would be diminished, and the treasurer could not take that house for back taxes for 3 years. And eventually the blight would spread down the block. We went from 1.8 million people in this city to 700,000 people walking away from their homes in astonishing numbers. It seemed like it was unsolvable. But we brought in a team who sued the owners of the houses for failing to maintain their property when they first became vacant. And when we took title, I would go out with a pickup truck with punch and coffee and cookies and bring out the neighbors and say, this house is going up for sale on Wednesday. Go and bid. I'd go to the local church and the minister would make an announcement to their congregation. You can move into this neighborhood. 500 houses that had been abandoned. We got people to move back in. These problems are not unsolvable. We just need a change in leadership.
There are 70,000 abandoned houses in the city of Detroit.
Right.
70,000.
Yes.
That's an awesome, awesome amount of abandonment.
correct.
We're going to have to do something more drastic than just put 500 people in a house.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. Mike, you got your start in Wayne County government and went on to DMC. Now you want to go into the mayor's office. A lot of the folks that were with you in Wayne County followed you to the DMC. Some of them are now helping you on the campaign. Should Detroiters worry about cronyism, given what we've been through recently with the Kilpatrick administration? In fact, the Kilpatricks were part of that team in Wayne County. Should they be worried about a return to that sort of politics?
I think you should look at my track record. So I went from county government, where I'm very proud of the things that we did, to the prosecutor's office. Who was my team? The head of the drug house unit, a fellow by the name of Warren Evans, before he became sheriff and police chief. The number 2, Sam Gardner, the former chief judge of Recorder's Court. My number 3, Virgil Smith, who has gone on to be the chief judge of the Circuit Court. Kenny King, who's now going on to be chief judge of 36th District Court, and Portia Roberson, who I brought in, who now looks like she's on her way to be in the Corporation Council. If you look at what happened at DMC, the leadership that turned DMC around, and every one of the people I just mentioned to you are all Detroiters. We built from this community people who look like this community. When I got to DMC, my right hand, Conrad Mallett, who's the chief administrative officer, the president of receiving, Iris Taylor, the president of Sonic Grace, Dr. Reggie Eady, the president of Children's, Dr. Herman Gray, all lifelong Detroiters, all products of the Detroit public school system. Every place I have been able to recruit great talent. When people say there is not talent in Detroit, they are wrong. And I believe that we are, and you're seeing the next generation of leaders emerging in my campaign, starting with Brian Barnhill, my campaign manager, 26 years old, Harvard government grad who grew up across from City Airport, and I hope to bring in the next generation of leaders the same way.
Well, wait, hold on, Lisa. Hold on, Lisa, before you answer. That wasn't really an answer to that question, was it? I mean, we were talking about the...
He made it sound like I have one group of people that go with me everywhere.
Well, no,
That's not true.
I think what he was trying to get at is the sort of culture of pay to play, whatever you want to call it, that we've had a problem with in Detroit and Wayne County for some time. What is the expectation, if you were elected mayor, for the future of that, which is a system that you were part of in Wayne County?
You know, I've learned with Ed McNamara, they remember your mistakes a lot longer than they remember your accomplishments. And I won't tell you that we were perfect, but we did an awful lot of good things, including 14 straight balanced budgets and a modern airport and stadiums. But I'd say, look at where I've been. When I went to the prosecutor's office, we did a great job, and nobody's criticizing the job that was there. When we came to DMC, I switched to an entirely different industry and put together a great team. And I think you conduct yourselves in a particular way, and I'm happy to have that record stand up.
No, Mike, I think this. I think if you're really serious about changing the fortunes of the city of Detroit, Detroiters, as you mentioned, have to be part of that fix. And no matter who is the mayor, we have some fine people sitting up here, and as I've indicated in a former mayor's forum, that they could all come and work for me. I don't have a problem with them punching me appointing them to some significant point. But we've got some brains in this town, and for folk to think that Detroit is on its knees and it has no prayer and no hope of being able to provide good leadership, I think it's crazy, first of all, to assume that. I have sat, for example, he talks about rebuilding houses in a community. I rebuilt an entire community, the Virginia Park area, where we had a riot in 1967, which caused the exodus of people to leave.
But Fred, we're talking right now about cronyism, which has been a
Well, I
problem
understand
in
that,
local government. We'll get to the other stuff. Want to go to Benny next. You've got quite an entourage too, Benny. I think you all fill the hotel here. I mean, how do you?
I have one person who is up here with me that's unpaid.
You look like a comet going through that hotel. If you look at,
I can't help it if everybody wants to follow me around, Nolan. That's not my problem.
I got that same problem.
You got that same problem.
But you look at this, people are worried after having come through the Kilpatrick scandal. And say what you will about Dave Bing, he did return integrity to the office and ethical behavior to the office.
Hold on. I'm glad you asked that question, because I believe fundamentally, I've been a law enforcement person my entire life. I believe that when people do things wrong, that they should suffer for them. That's why on 3 occasions I asked the federal government to come into my administration and take a look at it, because when you've done nothing wrong, you don't fear the FBI and the Justice Department. When drugs came up missing from my property room, they came in, did the investigation, the responsible parties all got arrested. Our internal auditing system alerted us to it. We did something about it. When we had people who cheated on a promotional exam, we asked the feds to come in and take a look at it, and people went to prison. When we had the third time I did the cheating, it was another time. I can't remember the other one right now, but I asked all 3 times. When we discovered that there are things that are wrong through the mechanisms that we have in place, we put people in jail. That's what I do. So if you're talking about ethics and integrity, I'll stack that up against anybody, because my administration is always open to anybody to look at. Nobody invites the feds into their house if they aren't clean, because you can look at whoever you want to look at once you come in.
Listen, as someone who is a trained auditor,
a CPA, right?
a CPA, a certified public accountant. So let me just break down what I did over my 18-year career. As a certified public accountant, I was responsible for performing audits to audit the integrity of the financials that were being presented to the public. Now, when we speak about the turnaround that took place at DMC, I applaud you for your efforts, and I love when I'm driving up I-75, I can see the new Children's Hospital. That is the result. But what we have to begin to examine is how did we get to that result? DMC had a $700 million debt on its book, not a deficit, but a debt. They weren't able to manage their cash. They were in the black, but by your own words in a mission, you were struggling. So Vanguard extended that safety net, if you will, and bought the DMC out. However, again, as an auditor, I look for contingencies, things that we have to fully disclose in the financial statements before a deal can be closed. Before that deal could close, it was reported by Cranes that the DMC had to pay out $30 million for anti-kickback violations. So as an auditor, I would caution my client and say, we can't close this deal until this is being addressed. So in full disclosure, Candidate Duggan, can you address that for us?
Sure.
Please?
Well, let's tell the truth, all right? We started with a system that had lost $500 million in 5 years. The board had voted to close receiving, had voted to close Hutzel, and the place was on the verge of bankruptcy. We made money 7 years in a row through the efforts of the 14,000 men and women at DMC, and we struck a deal with a national company to put $850 million in. The structure of that deal was that DMC was going to keep old liabilities, Vanguard was going to form a new company. A few months before the deal was to close, the feds advised us they'd changed a regulation nationally, and it was no longer going to allow Vanguard to form a new company. It meant they had to assume all past liabilities. Nobody had begun to audit it. We were getting near closing. We were about to lose the $850 million investment in this community. And the most complex thing in any hospital system are the so-called Stark laws. That is not a criminal issue, it's a civil issue, and our obligation to keep track of what we pay doctors is enormous. I had 2,500 doctors, 7 years of history, and I went to the feds and said, can you send your auditors in under the self-disclosure law and come in and give us a clean bill of health on all these things? We'd give our doctors seminars by the Wayne State community to upgrade their talents on a regular basis. Was that income to them, or was that a good thing for the hospital? These are gray areas under federal law. I tried to get the feds to come in and investigate in 60 days. They said they tried. Barb McQuaid was great. They said it would take a year. We were going to lose the deal. At which point, Barb McQuaid's office said, you know what? We don't need to do an investigation, because even if everything were wrong, the fine is based on ability to pay. And because DMC is providing $250 million a year in free care, they are never going to be hit with a huge fine on ability to pay. And even if you did everything wrong, it would be $30 million. The U.S. Attorney proposed, let's not do an investigation. There won't be any finding of wrongdoing. But if Vanguard is willing to pay that $30 million, they'll release the old liability. Vanguard made a business decision that in a total deal of $1.5 billion, $30 million was a good resolution. Vanguard agreed to the $30 million. The U.S. Attorney signed off on the $30 million. And Barb McQuaid made a public statement that they were technical violations, not something anybody should be in trouble for, and the deal closed. And I'm really proud of the fact that instead of saying, I couldn't get this done for this community, we needed this $850 million, I found a way to get it done, and I'm glad I had the cooperation of the federal government in doing it.
So should we take anti-kickback? Should we take those words lightly when we hear anti-kickback? I mean, the words are just what they are. As an auditor, I would have to issue a qualified report that has that very long explanation that you just provided in it to say that this is not a clean bill of health in terms of being able to sign off on your financial statement.
The U.S. Attorney issued the report that allowed the deal to go forward. I would have loved to have had a year because I think they would have come in and investigated it. And here's the thing, when you're giving, for example, free seminars to doctors to upgrade their skills, if you're flying them to Hawaii for your preferred doctors, you've got an issue. If you're doing something in the Harper conference room for everybody there, you don't. Had the feds had a year to come in and look at all this, I'm confident we would have had a clean bill of health. I wish they'd had a year. But given the fact that I had two choices, we could pay $30 million and get this deal done for the city, or we could kill the deal and take a year to prove that I was right. I made the decision, as did my board, many of the board members are here today, that Detroit was better served by getting the deal closed and getting the investment into the community.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the next question that goes to Sheriff Napoleon. You talked some about inviting federal government to come in and take a look at things, and they would find that most things were okay. But of course, one of the consequences of that was the consent decree that we are still under. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that happened while you were police chief, right?
The circumstances that led up to it did not happen while I was the chief. The circumstances, first of all, they were brought in to look at some questionable shootings that people in the community had.
Right.
Every single investigation was looked at. Every single investigation was determined to have been impartial and objective, and the activities of the agency was determined to be legitimate. What they then in turn looked at was conditions of confinement, which we knew had been in trouble for 30 years. We've been trying for many, many years to build a detention facility on the east and the west side, but never had the money in the budget to do it. The fact is, I've been gone 12 years and they still haven't fixed that problem. And they aren't going to fix it because it's a very expensive problem. So until such time as folks make up their mind that they're going to make a strong investment in public safety and do what needs to be done to make the city of Detroit safe, getting back to one of Lisa's earliest things about, me being the police chief, as the mayor of the city of Detroit, I can make those a priority and make sure that the things need to get done because I have priority in setting the budget.
So that's the second time you said, if I had more money, I could solve the problem.
Absolutely.
Is that a realistic possibility in the city of Detroit?
When you have to make budget decisions, it's not complicated. You have a budget like everybody else. The city budget is no different. You don't spend money you don't have. It's like you do your own personal budget, I would imagine, and like I do mine, and I've been doing it since I was 14 years old. I've never had a judgment, I never had a lien, never had a bankruptcy, and never had a garnishment. I understand how to manage money. The bottom line is that when you have to make priorities, you have to determine what those priorities are. Strategic review of city services. You have to figure out what's important, what you absolutely have to do, and then what you need help doing and what you're not going to do. So yeah, it all comes down to money. We know it's all about money.
But what we have discussed here is staying confined within the dollars that we currently have. In order to invest and fully invest in public safety and all the things that matter to the citizens of Detroit, is we have to grow our revenues. We've been talking about cutting and union concessions after concession after concession. We can only go to the concession stand so often here in the city of Detroit. We have to begin building revenues, and we do that by growing our community. Yes, we've shrunk to 700,000, but the vision that I have for the city of Detroit is that we're at 1 million again. And the way we
Okay,
do
but
that,
talk about how that happens. I mean, the reality is the city's still losing about 20,000 people a year. What is it that you would do as mayor that would reverse that?
well, here's what you have to do. You have a very thriving community in Midtown. You have young people who are moving back every day. You have people who are settling into downtown. These are thriving areas. There's a lot of innovation and a lot of energy that's being created there. We have to develop a model that says if they can do it in Midtown, then we can do it in your town, at Gratiot and 8 Mile, at Warren and Mack, at Greenfield and Finkel. But not only that, is we have to go about the business of making sure that in the next 5 years, those young people who are moving to the city of Detroit, they're eventually going to get married, start to have children. They're not going to be able to raise their kids in a loft or in an apartment. We have to build strong neighborhoods so that they can transition to be a Detroiter still, give them good educational options because that is key, in order to keep them there, and we continue to grow from there. When that activity begins to happen, it's attractive, it's energy, it's the new way for Detroit.
But the way to make that happen, quite frankly, is that you have to go back to the basics. And what are the basics? The basics are being able to have and balance a city budget. Listen, you can turn around corporate sector, corporations all day long. Government is not the same. It's not built like a corporation in the traditional sense. We provide services to people. As a member of the House of Representatives, part of my job is to make sure that those services are delivered to people who are in these neighborhoods that we're talking about. The issue, though, always comes down to what is the budget? What is it that we have that we can have fire, police, and EMS? When you run out of trucks and you don't have functioning fire equipment, what difference does it make if you call the fire department? They can't come and put the fire out. If you deal with police, and we know that the average police officer in Detroit costs $80,000 a year, multiplied by 2,400 individuals. That's a whole lot of money. If we don't have that money coming in the door, then we're going to be placed in a situation where we're forced to make reductions and cost cuts. This city is burning almost $1.5 million a day.
Let's hear
And
from
we've got to get that
on
under
this
control.
question. And the question was, and we wandered away from it, but the question was Benny's management of the police department.
Okay, and I want to go back to the consent agreement because I came in as the prosecutor at the time the investigation was starting. And, you know, we tend to point the finger at one person and say it's all their fault. And the fact is the systems are interrelated. And I think my first month on the job, one of the issues that the feds were looking at was there were a lot of arrests by the police of witnesses to homicides that weren't ultimately charged. And I sat down with Chief Napoleon, and he says, when I don't get witnesses, your prosecutors say the cops screwed up the case. And I say, well, my prosecutors say the cops didn't investigate. Instead of pointing fingers, our team sat down together, and we said there is a mechanism called an investigative subpoena where you can get an order from a judge to compel somebody to talk. We put a process in place together that at the scene of a shooting, a prosecutor came out with the homicide investigators, got the court order, got people to talk, cleared the cases, and solved one of the key consent agreements before the feds ever left town.
So you two work together. Huh?
I'm telling you that everything is not one person's fault. We've got to get cooperation.
Like you and Benny tonight seem to have a bigger bromance than me and Steve.
Speak for yourself.
Lisa,
Listen,
Lisa, I got a question for
Yes,
you
sir.
as we move on here. You're a CPA.
yes, sir.
She is certified public accountant. I'm a lawyer. Mike's a lawyer.
You want to go sit next
She
to
said that's not as hard to do.
You're a CPA. The governor's a CPA.
Yes.
You both, the governor took a look at the numbers, the city of Detroit numbers, and came to the conclusion that the financial situation was so dire that an emergency manager was needed. You looked at those numbers and came to a different conclusion. How do you justify your opposition to an emergency manager given the financial condition of the city?
I examined the city of Detroit's books. I spent 3 months doing that with my team of financial experts who actually prepared the city of Detroit's comprehensive annual financial report. If you look and read the financial statements, you will see the additional $5.7 billion related to retiree health care costs. When you add all those things together, yeah, you can reach $15 billion, but what's on the books, what's present for us today, is about $2.1 billion. You got your general long-term obligations, which we're paying back. We're spending 20% on every dollar to service our debt. My thing was, debt is not something for us to fear, it's something for us to manage. And in the city of Detroit, the debt that we have is manageable. So the position that I took was that the numbers were being presented in such a way to justify the need for an emergency manager. If we do the basic blocking and tackling in terms of having strong managers in place, making sure we're not spending more than we need to, paying people on time, opening the mail for God's sake, those are basic things that we haven't been doing in the city of Detroit. So it's a management issue that can be resolved, and that's why this CPA is running for mayor.
I will say this, if we quibble and get caught up in a quibble about what the real numbers are, we're never going to get the problem solved. First of all, it's like a patient who has cancer. You can't run around and pretend you don't have it. If you have it, you have it. The question becomes then, what do we do about it? The debt that we have, like I said before, and this is really not disputable, you've got $380 million debt that's going to come out of the operations end of the city, and then you've got a $16 billion long-term structural debt. You can't say, I'm not going to look at both of those and try to resolve them. If the city of Detroit does not do that, it will indeed have to be bankrupt, because that's the only thing that's going to be left. If we come in, it's about changing the way that we operate the finances in the city of Detroit.
Okay, I hate to cut you
No one
off.
other than myself, I'm going to let you go, Stephen, but no one other than myself has offered what those solutions are.
Okay.
Again, this isn't
Oh,
a
yeah,
January
okay.
1st, 2014.
Look at the
This is
clock
right
up
now.
there. We
But go ahead.
got to move on here.
Thank you.
The next segment, we're going to have each of you ask a simple question of one other candidate. We'll start here with Mr. Duggan.
You know, Lisa, you've talked about your Kickstart initiative in the course of your campaign, and you've not really explained it as thoroughly, I think, as you should. What do you see that as doing for the city?
The Kickstart initiative addressed what we can do on a local level, what needs to be done, not just can, what needs to be done on a local level, and what needs to also be done on the state level, and looking at federal oversight of how we've managed some of our grant dollars in the health services, transportation, as well as in workforce development. From a local standpoint, what that involves are those 4 initiatives that I spoke of before. Number 1 is better allocating our costs in the general fund so that we can reduce the accumulated deficit and begin to pull down more federal dollars. That helps us there. The second piece was making sure from a state level that we get the legislation passed that the consent agreement said was going to be a responsibility of the state. That is allowing the city of Detroit to better collect its income taxes. Instead of putting that burden on the residents of the city of Detroit who work outside of the city, they would be able to have withholdings take place over the course of the year and not burden them at the end of the year. Last but not least is making sure from the federal level, again, it's about how we are managing our federal resources. They have been a pass-through to for-profit or nonprofit organizations as opposed to the city of Detroit managing that, which will help us with our deficit. So that's what the Kickstart Initiative is, and that's what we will be able to govern by.
Okay, Representative Durhal?
Yes. Do I answer this question?
No,
or
you
do I
get to
answer-
ask. You get to ask a question.
Ooh, well, I'm going to pose a question, I think, to Mike Duggan, and that is, Mike, you call yourself the turnaround person, and we've heard you do that in many, many instances. In Detroit, because of the financial situation, what is it that you will specifically do within the first 100 days of your administration to turn the city of Detroit around?
You know, that's, I think, the key question for each of us. And as far as I'm concerned, we got to come in doing 3 things at once. We have got to cut the police response time. It is taking too long, and people are not safe, and I think we can take steps relatively quickly. I hope that Chief Craig gets it done before I get there, but I'm pleased to have the support in this campaign of former chiefs Ike McKinnon and Warren Evans. But the initiatives that have been talked about moving officers to the streets who are otherwise doing jobs that could be done by civilians, doing things like making sure the in-car computers work so the officers can get the reports done as they're transporting prisoners back to the precinct, don't have to go up into the precinct and be off of the streets and the like. Second, we have got to get the street lights on. It's fine that we have an authority that over 5 or 6 years is going to replace the old poles and the old wires, but we got to have accountability on the repair crews. There is no accountability going on in this town in getting those street lights repaired when they can be repaired. And then third, we are going to start rolling through the city in the blocks with 1 and 2 and 3 abandoned houses. And yes, I only got 500 when I was the prosecutor, but the prosecutor shouldn't have been doing abandoned houses. The mayor should have been doing it. And I could see us getting to the point where we are taking hundreds of houses every few months and getting them occupied and start to slow the spread. If we can do those 3 things, I think we can start to build confidence of the people of this community.
Okay. We go next to our CPA, Ms. Howze.
Like many of your supporters, I like Mike. So I'm going to ask a question of you as well. It was already brought up in conversation about your former association and participation within the McNamara administration. When indictments were coming down, it got hot, you got out. You joined DMC. You were running a small surplus. You weren't able to manage the cash. Hospitals were going to be closed, in other words. You wanted to save the DMC. You were able to do that by selling the Vanguard. You transitioned out. When DPS lent $10 million. Now, DPS, we know they're struggling just as bad as the city of Detroit. I mean, we've had an emergency manager or state involvement for the past 10 or 12 years. As a former board member for the EAA, you said that you were not aware that those monies had been lent. And
Do I
shortly
need to write all these
thereafter,
questions down?
Yeah, let's get a
Let's get
question.
to the
mark.
question.
so here's the question. On 3 occasions, things changed. You felt that it was going to impact the mayoral campaign as it relates to EAA. How can we trust you to stick and stay because the issues in the city of Detroit are so great right now? How can
So
we
there's a
trust
good
you to
question.
do that?
Did I stick and stay? I was the deputy county executive for 14 years. Longest serving deputy county executive we've had. I didn't leave because people weren't being investigated. I got elected Wayne County prosecutor. The investigations came 2 years later, and the U.S. attorney was clear that I didn't have anything to do with it. I think the 14-year commitment I made in Wayne County was great. I spent 9 years at the Detroit Medical Center, making me very close to the longest-serving CEO in DMC's history. I didn't get out because there was debt. I took a place that was 4 months from running out of cash, and I sold it to a national company that has now built a new pediatrics building at Children's Hospital, building a new $100 million heart hospital at Harper, building a new $80 million emergency room at Sinai Grace, just opened an emergency room at Harper, largest investment in the history of the city. And when it got to that point, I moved on. On the EAA, I was one of 11 volunteer board members at a board that meets once every 2 months. And it became clear to me that everything the EAA did was going to be attacked in the mayoral campaign, and I was becoming a liability to the organization and not an asset, and I stepped down from the volunteer board. But I'm pretty sure that my tenure at both the prosecutor, or both the DMC and Wayne County, a lot longer than your tenure in the jobs that you had. I haven't run anywhere.
Okay,
And
Sheriff
Benny,
Napoleon.
I'm just guessing here that you don't have a question for Mike.
They've asked Mike a lot of questions. I guess my
You guys aren't looking ahead a little bit, are you?
I'm sorry?
You're not looking ahead a little bit, are you?
I'm looking right where we are today. My question actually is for Representative Durhal. Fred, you say that you can fix it.
Yes.
In light of what we know to be the political environment in the city of Detroit today and where we believe the voters are, how do you plan on winning this race? And if you did win, what are you going to fix?
Well, we're going to win this race because we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going directly to the voters and talk to my voters. The folk in this room Some of them are voters in the city of Detroit. So I'm telling you right now, you're looking at your next mayor. What I think we must do in the city of Detroit is, one, grab hold of the finances, and then number two, we need to look at the delivery of services. I know I'm electable because I've been elected 4 times in a row. So it's not about whether I am or not. It's what we're going to be able to bring to the table in this particular race. And I look forward to the competition, quite frankly, because I think I'm just as good or better than some of the folks that are sitting here on this stage with me. And as I said to you before, I would be more than happy to have any of them come and work for me once I become mayor.
Okay, closing statements. We'll start at that end this time. Sheriff Napoleon, 1 minute.
1 minute.
1 minute, that's
Didn't
what we
you hear-
agreed to.
Didn't you hear me say I'm a lawyer? 1 minute. Get real.
Do your best.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very significant moment in the city of Detroit. We have some serious challenges. We need leadership. We need tough leadership. We need leadership that is used to running large organizations, used to dealing with big budgets, and someone who has made tough decisions. I've done that for almost 38 years of my life. No, everything has not been perfect. No, everything has not been the way I would like it to be. But the fact is, as a lifelong Detroiter, no one is more committed to changing what's going on in this community and bringing the people together who can change this community. I have worked with every community group, every religious group, just about every business person in the city of Detroit. I've been able to galvanize, organize, mobilize, and strategize with the folks that can really make a difference in this community. At the end of the day, we're going to need leadership that can bring all these people together and make them work together to save the city of Detroit. I'm that person.
All right, Ms. Howze?
Clearly, we have a number of veterans that are on this stage, probably more than 60 years combined political experience or more. We've done it their way. We are where we are in the city of Detroit. But where are we going? With the Lisa Howze administration, what you can count on is someone who can count. The budget in the city of Detroit is in much need of financial repair. Lisa Howze can fix it. When you talk about the old and when you talk about the past, we have to look forward to the future. The divides ahead of us is much larger than that rearview mirror. We're not looking back, we're looking forward. And we need to do that with new leadership, with new vision, and a fresh face, fresh ideas, and fresh legs that can run this race. Not only run it to run, but run it to win. And that's the same way I intend to run the city of Detroit. We will deliver victory after victory after victory. If you are a business owner, you can win in the city of Detroit with Lisa Howze as your next mayor.
All right,
First
Representative
of
Durhal.
all, I want to thank the Detroit Chamber for putting on this event. I think it is in the public interest, and kudos to all of you and to our 2 moderators today, Nolan, Finley, and also Stephen Henderson, who I have had times where I agreed and times when I didn't agree with them. But that's
We don't need to get into all that, Fred.
That's right. But here's the deal. We need in the city of Detroit a leader who is respected not only in the city of Detroit, but also in Lansing and also in Washington. I am that person. I'm the only one on this stage who can say to you in all truthfulness that I've served on 4 levels of government: city, county, federal, and state. I know government backwards and forwards. That's the kind of leader that we need to have in the mayor's office on the 11th floor downtown. Part of the problem we have now is that the leadership is not effective and it's not able to operate in different theaters like the state legislature. We have a bunch of state legislators here today, right now, that I'm looking at who are willing and ready to help the city of Detroit. But you got to come with a good program, and Durhal is the guy to bring that to you.
Okay, close this out, Mr. Duggan.
I made a really hard decision to leave a job that I loved at the Detroit Medical Center, and it was not easy to leave the 14,000 men and women there. But I just looked, and 400 murders in this city last year is just not acceptable. People losing their jobs because the buses don't show up on time is just not acceptable. People not being able to walk the street because we can't get the street lights to work is just not acceptable. And so I've been working in this city on just about every area of government for 32 years, and I'm running for one reason. I love Detroit, I love the people here, and I think I can help. And I hope you'll give me consideration this year.
All right, let's give all our candidates a hand.
We want to thank our candidates. Thanks to the Chamber for sponsoring this event. And thanks to the folks who bought tickets and came to hear us. We're going to see you all in the Tea Garden for bourbon in about 30 minutes.
All right.
Thanks to everyone.
All right.